You hear bits and pieces, but there's this real curiosity, I think, about what spiritual life was actually like in Africa before Christianity arrived. Because often the story you get is pretty, well, one-dimensional. So that's what we're trying to tackle in this deep dive, get into the nuances.
That's so important, moving past those broad, often inaccurate generalizations. There was such a diverse tapestry of spiritual understanding, long before any colonial influence.
And to help us with that, we found this really interesting source. It's a YouTube video from the Building 7 channel. It's called, "What Did Africans Believe in Before Christianity?"
Okay.
And what jumped out at me was that it seems to offer a more sort of internal look, an insider perspective on these African spiritual systems.
Yeah, and a perspective like that is really valuable because it helps frame the arrival of Christianity in Africa properly. It's easy to forget just how deep those Christian roots go on the continent itself.
You mean like the Ethiopian Orthodox Church?
Exactly. I mean, it was already ancient, think about it, over 1,000 years old when the Protestant Reformation kicked off in Europe in the 1500s.
1,000 years. Wow.
And it predates the formal establishment of the Catholic Church in the 10th century by about 500 years.
Okay, that really reframes things, doesn't it?
It does.
It makes it clear that African spiritual ways of thinking weren't just waiting for something else. They were vibrant, developing on their own terms, long before those later European movements.
Absolutely. It counters that whole idea of borrowed traditions.
Which is why this source feels useful.
Right. So our goal, our mission for this deep dive, is really to unpack the core ideas of traditional African spiritual thought as this source presents them.
Getting beyond the simple labels.
Exactly. Trying to appreciate the philosophies underneath.
Okay, so where do we start? One of the first big points the video makes is just how diverse these systems were. It wasn't one single African religion.
Right. That's fundamental. Absolutely not. The speaker specifically mentions cultures like the Yoruba, the Bantu, and stresses that none of them dominated the others across the whole continent. You have to think of them as different groups, each figuring out their relationship with the divine, their understanding of the cosmos, in their own way.
Within their own contexts. Makes sense. Not a monolith.
Not at all. Independent explorations.
And the source brings up this really fascinating idea that a central aim in many of these cultures was about building human character that imitates divinity. What do we take from that?
Well, what's interesting there is it suggests this deep focus on personal growth.
Right.
On actively trying to embody spiritual principles in how you live your life. It wasn't just about, say, rituals or specific doctrines, but this ongoing effort to align yourself with something higher.
A way of being, almost.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, something the source really emphasizes, and you can't understand these systems without it, is the impact of colonialism.
Ah, yes. It paints a pretty stark picture, doesn't it?
Right.
How these beliefs were misunderstood and actively dismantled.
Actively is the word. The example given of the Igbo people and their sacred groves, it's powerful.
How so?
Well, the British saw that these natural spaces were like the heart of Igbo spiritual and social power, so they deliberately destroyed them.
Just destroyed them.
Yeah, it was a direct hit on their belief system, their social fabric, everything.
That's chilling. And the source mentions the Yoruba were handled differently.
Right, it contrasts it. With the Yoruba, the approach was more about trying to co-opt or control their existing leadership, their kingship structures. Different strategies for the same goal, essentially.
Which was what, according to the source?
The speaker is pretty blunt, calls it basic human greed, envy, and jealousy. Not some genuine religious mission or attempt at understanding.
That's a critical point the source makes. It really shifts things away from that old civilizing mission idea.
Towards a more honest look at colonial motives.
And the video also talks about how history itself got rewritten. Like, early reports showed sophisticated societies.
Yes. It mentions early accounts describing planned cities, organized layouts, impressive architecture. Even drawings existed of these places.
Drawings?
Yeah. But then somehow, over a couple of centuries, the story completely changes. Suddenly the narrative becomes, barbarians.
It's hard to fathom that kind of deliberate erasure.
It is. And that historical amnesia, as you called it, feeds directly into so many modern misconceptions.
Right, like the whole idea of voodoo.
Yeah.
That term gets thrown around so much, usually negatively. The source tackles that directly.
It does. The speaker states very clearly, There was no religion called Voodoo when we left Africa.
So it's a later development.
Described as a new development, yeah. Something that emerged in a different place, a different context. That's a really important distinction the source wants us to grasp.
It really is. It means we have to be careful with our words.
The source basically says we need to rephrase and recast how we even talk about African worship.
Okay, so if voodoo, as we commonly picture it, isn't directly from pre-colonial Africa, how does the source explain the systems that often get lumped under that label? It talks about elements, lows.
Yeah, the explanation given is that these systems involve this deep reverence for what they call lows.
Lows.
Which are essentially interpretations of the forces of nature, of cosmology, understandings developed by ancestors over generations through experience observation.
Ah, okay. And then there are the Vives, those intricate drawings.
Right. And the video offers a fascinating take on those. That they aren't just random patterns or art, they're understood as interpretations by these ancestral great minds of fundamental cosmic energy formations.
Cosmic energy.
Yeah, patterns believed to respond to vibrations like language or music. So the Vives are like visual maps of these elemental energy vibrations.
Wow, okay, that shifts the perspective completely, from superstitious drawings to a kind of cosmic diagram.
Exactly. And it connects to how the source explains Orishas too, another term that comes up a lot.
Right. And they aren't gods in the way we might usually think.
Correct. The speaker is clear. Orishas are not persons. They're anthropomorphic symbols.
Meaning?
Human-like representations. Not literal beings, but powerful symbols that embody concepts, ideas, principles, representing forces and powers in nature, in humanity, in the cosmos.
So they're like tools. Tools for understanding these big forces.
That's a good way to put it. Tools for understanding and relating to these fundamental forces.
Okay, so it's less about worshiping individual deities and more about engaging with these core principles of how the universe works.
Precisely. And that leads directly into this concept the source introduces, African sacred science.
Sacred science, that sounds profound.
It is presented that way. The source argues that developing the theology around the Orishas, figuring out their functions, their connections, how to interact with them, that is a deep form of sacred science.
Like a knowledge system.
The sophisticated knowledge system about how the world works, built on ancestral observation and insight.
And the speaker makes a pretty bold claim about it, doesn't he? Something about its depth.
A very strong statement. Says that no other institution even borders on the depth of this ancestral understanding.
That's quite something.
It is. And it really highlights the final point made in this part of the source. The urgent need to properly study and defend the integrity of these indigenous institutions.
Because they hold this profound understanding.
Exactly. The argument is there just hasn't been enough serious study to really appreciate and protect this ancestral knowledge.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. The big takeaways from this source seem to be, first, the sheer diversity and, frankly, sophistication of pre-colonial African spiritual thought.
Definitely not monolithic.
No. A whole tapestry of unique cultural ways of understanding. Then there's the really damaging impact of colonialism, the interference, the deliberate misrepresentation.
Can be overstated.
And maybe most importantly, digging into the deeper philosophical, maybe even scientific ideas behind traditions often dismissed with simple labels.
Right. Understanding concepts like lows, vaves, orishas. It means moving beyond those superficial interpretations.
So for anyone listening, understanding this stuff really requires ditching labels like voodoo and trying to engage with the actual intellectual heritage the source points to.
Yeah, appreciating the depth of that ancestral knowledge, the unique ways different African cultures explored the divine and their place in the universe.
It really gives you food for thought.
Yeah.
I mean, considering the source's claim about the depth of African sacred science, it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Wonder what?
Well, what other pre-colonial knowledge systems, not just in Africa, but everywhere, might hold really profound insights that we've just overlooked or dismissed because of dominant narratives?
That's a powerful question.
It really makes you think about the potential in reclaiming and exploring more of that often hidden intellectual history. What else is out there that we're missing?